So today I'm making the Lava Lamp Ladies Quilt. I'm using Alexandra Henry fabric and I'm cutting around each image. There's different ladies on this fabric and I've cut them, fussy cut them. And as you can see, this is a negative space. I've just roughly cut around it initially. And then I went ahead and ironed it onto the heat and bond. This again is an Alexandra Henry fabric. Don't Gamble with Love. And it's by the De Leon group, and I believe the owners are also the designers, and it's a beautiful fabric. So here I've ironed it onto the heat and bond, which is the adhesive that I'm using. Okay, you want to press, press, press. I'm using steam. And I've cut around the images, as you can see, so that the sticky part doesn't stick to my iron. It's a paper-backed adhesive, so it's sticky on both sides. And I've used the highest setting. I've used the cotton setting. There's the paper. I've used the cotton setting and a little bit of steam. So once I've ironed it on, I fussy cut around them, and this is what the images look like once they are cut around. Okay, I originally started out this quilt with a design of 9 panels with lava lamps, but I changed it up mid-filming. So here are the images that I had originally planned to use on one quilt. So right here what I'm doing is I am auditioning fabrics. By auditioning fabrics, I am taking the images that I cut out roughly, and I am putting them on the backgrounds that I plan to use. By doing this, I don't have to press them and waste the fabric or the image if it doesn't work out. If I like the way it looks, then I use it. So the green on the left is the one that I wound up going with, and then I did like a pink, orange, yellow that is exactly the same print, and as an unintended consequence, they glow in the dark. So those were my first images that I used, or rather the first backgrounds that I use. Here's another image, and again I'm auditioning the fabric. This one's slightly bigger. You can play around with the order of, you know, do you want this one in the center, that one on the right, that one on the left, and that's the beauty of auditioning your fabrics. Okay, here's the first image that I used, and this is what I've used for my lava lamp quilt sample. Okay, I love that tie-dye and the blue and purple on the right. Didn't go with either of these with this image, but you'll see how it turns out. So there's that one, and then I use a different image for the center for my final quilt, and again, I'm auditioning whenever I change up the images, the order, whatever I audition, make sure that it's cohesive and it works well together. And here's my center panel for my center lava lamp. Okay, now you can do this before or after you fussy cut it. It doesn't matter. If you have a good feel for colors especially, then you can imagine what it would look like without the background. Okay, there's a heat and bond. It's a heat and bond light that I use, and I traced out my lava lamps and then I cut them out, and there's all the different patterns that I have. These I'll be using, I've already cut them out, so I'll be using them for different quilts. And here's my final background with the image. And I sewed the sashing on, which is the fire, the flames. So I used 3-inch panels for the flames and a flannel batting. I don't need it to be a heavier batting because it's just going to be on the wall, so it doesn't need to be a warm batting, just something that makes it look like a quilt. So right now I am top stitching, and I'm using a clear Metler thread. I'm top stitching to secure the edges And there's the back side. I've used the wrong side of the flannel to sew onto the wrong side of the lava lamp. And the reason I did that was because I want the white to be the brighter side in case it shows through, which it didn't, but you never know. So here I'm just folding the flannel, the quilt, so that I can fit it under my sewing machine, and it just makes easier sewing. Also, what I've done is I've put straight pins, and you can use safety pins or straight pins. I use straight pins so that I can quickly just take them out, but typically you can use safety pins so that you don't pinch yourself, and it just is more secure because they don't come out. Now I clip my threads as I go because I just feel like I don't like that messiness that's under there. So I always clip my threads as I go when I sew. And then the other thing that I do is I stitch in the ditch on the seams between the sashing and the quilt. So there I am stitching in the ditch, again using clear thread, Metler thread. And I have to say, of all the threads I've used so far, Metler has been the best for me. It worked out really nice. There was no pinching, pulling, tugging. It was a very smooth thread to work with on my industrial machine. Now I'm doing a zigzag stitch here. And on the stitch in the ditch, I'm using a straight seam, a straight stitch, I should say. Again, clipping those threads before I hit the turn. And also, I did it off camera, but I also stitched on the images of the ladies onto the lava lamp after I pressed them onto the background, the black background. Here I'm zigzagging the stitches, the seams between the lava lamp base and the middle part. And I'm zigzagging it so that it stays secure on either side. Okay, make sure to get all the seams there. And this just ensures that it won't, because this fabric was a little, the gray part was a little frayy. It frayed just slightly. So I wanted to make sure that over time it just stays secure and doesn't come apart. The other thing too about the way I'm doing this is over time a quilt that's hanging can sag if it's not stitched in the right places. You can hand stitch it or machine stitch it. I chose to machine stitch it. Now here I'm going to cut out the excess that you see at the bottom once I've gone ahead and done all my top stitching. I don't need that extra part, and I'm also getting ready to sew on the binding. I made my own binding for the quilt, and by doing that I cut my fabric on a 45-degree angle in a 2-inch strip so that I can have 1/2-inch binding all the way around the quilt. As you can see, the pins are on top of the quilt still. I need them to hold the quilt securely. And they're just randomly placed, you know, whatever. You don't, here's where you don't want them is in the seam, so that when you sew. Here I'm making my own seam binding. I've gone ahead and stitched it all together. I used a bunch of 45-degree angle strips of 2 inches, and then using the bias tape tool, I am ironing it using the highest setting cotton. This is a cotton fabric. All my fabrics for this batting, or rather for the quilt, are cottons. So here I've cut a 2-inch strip. I've put it through the bias tape tool, and I'm pressing it using steam. And it goes really fast. People are sometimes put off by having to make their own binding, but I don't mind. It goes really fast. So here I've already cut the 45-degree angle for the beginning of the tape. You want to start and end with the 45-degree angle. I don't pin my binding onto my quilt. I just sew. What you want to do though is you want to make sure that it's catching on the bottom as well as it is the top. So you know it's catching on the top because you're watching it, but periodically look behind the quilt, because you don't want to sew the whole quilt binding thinking you're done, and then you go back and there's spots where you have missed. So I was lucky and I was able to catch all of the bottom binding. And what I do is I stitch all the way to the end of the quilt, and then I back stitch for about 1.5 inches, and then I turn the corner to get those nice sharp corners with my binding. So I'm using a black thread. I don't use the clear for this part. I use the black, well, whatever thread is matching your binding. So in this case it was black, so I used black thread on the bobbin and in the top thread. Okay, you want your corners to be sharp, and that's why I do mine the way I do. There's other methods, but that's just my method. That's what I feel most comfortable. You see I'm back stitching there, picking up the binding, tucking it under, over, making sure that that corner is at a 45-degree angle, and then turn. Okay. So I have one more corner to turn. And just straight stitch. Now I'm using a smaller stitch than I did for the stitch in the ditch. And the stitch in the ditch you can use a larger, like a 5 or a 4 stitch length. At least on my machine it's a 5 or a 4. And that's the widest or the longest setting for the stitch. So the other thing that I did off camera was, I don't know if you can tell in this photo, I've top stitched all the way around at the corners, at the edge I should say, not the corners, at the edge of the quilt. I've top stitched it all the way around the 4 edges just to hold it securely, so that when I sew on my seam binding I don't have to manipulate it, it's already in place for me. That makes sewing on the binding a lot easier, it goes faster, smoother, and it's more secure. And for some reason I repeated this portion, I don't know. But here it goes, just a straight stitch. And then I'll turn the last corner. Now again, I leave, there's the backing. I did a tattoo themed backing, even though nobody will probably ever see the backing because this was meant to be hung on a wall, but you never know, somebody might hang it in a window and then you can see both sides. So I decided to use a tattoo themed backing. So here I'm turning the last corner. Now I usually don't cut my bias tape until I'm close to the edge, because I want to make sure, or rather to the center, I want to make sure that my binding meets up and surpasses the length of the original binding when I sewed it. You want to go about another inch or so beyond the binding where it meets in the middle. And I don't backstitch, I just keep sewing. And then I lift my presser foot, I lift my needle, and I clip the thread. I don't backstitch there. I don't want to create any more bulk because you've already got the 2 layers of seam binding. And here I'm just checking my seam binding to make sure that they match up. It meets, and it does. So I stitch straight across, and as you can see I don't backstitch, I just keep sewing. So there you go. And that is my quilt. Now I just have to press it, smooth everything out, and as I said, an unintended consequence is that it glows in the dark. At least the water part does. And I thought that was really cool. Wasn't out to have that happen, but it does, so. There you go, there's a finished quilt. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I have comments turned off, but you can contact me at wesewpro@gmail.com. gmail.com. I hope you liked this video. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.